Welcome to the Neos Monthly Podcast, where we talk about the importance of obtaining strong monthly income from your investments while taking tax efficiency to the top priority. I'm Tom Lydon, and as always, joined by the founders of Neos, Garrett Paolella and Troy Cates. Gentlemen, welcome. Great seeing you.
Great seeing you too, Tom. Good to see you, Tom.
Hey, we have a lot to talk about. We're going to get a little serious. It's tax time. But first, Garrett, you just got some good news about an award. Share it with us.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tom. Exciting to announce that the Neos Gold High Income ETF, or IAUI, actually won the Best New Options Income ETF by ETF.com. So we actually wanted to first thank all of our investors and everyone who voted for us, but really excited to help bring, this accolade to all of our investors and shareholders and partners. It's been great to see.
It is. And Troy, you got to be excited. This comes on the back of winning ETF.com's Best New Active ETF. It's got to be a great boost for Neos.
Yeah, to have two great awards like this, back to back year after year, one for QQQI and this new one for IAUI is really exciting for the team as we continue to grow our suite of products.
Excellent. Well, congratulations. All right, now let's dive into the core of this episode. It's tax time. Of course, Uncle Sam wants his money. This might be one of the most important podcasts that we've had in a long time. We're going to get a little clinical here, but the following information is really important and people have questions. So let's dive into it. First, Troy, maybe you can walk us through it. We talk a lot about tax efficiency, but what are the most important components about tax efficiency as you folks are managing these portfolios?
Sure, it's a great question that comes up a lot. And when you think about it, all of our funds are ETFs. So the ETF structure in itself is very tax efficient the way it was designed. But for us, it's really important to have tax efficient underlying exposures within the fund to kind of build upon that. So when you think about some of our funds are long T-bills, some are long the individual names that might bring off kick off a dividend that's qualified dividend income from those equities. The T-bills are exempt from state and local taxes that passes through the ETF structure. But one of the other important things you might have heard us talk about before is the types of options we use. Wherever we can, we try to use index options that are classified as 1256 contracts. And just to remind everybody, that's where you get a 60% long-term, 40% short-term cap gain on the P&L off of those option trades themselves. So it's thinking about that combined with the potential of return of capital. And I know we've talked about this a number of times, Tom, but I think it's important to understand how return of capital works. Wherever there's a potential loss generated in a portfolio, a realized loss within the ETF structure that can be carried forward, if there's a distribution made, like these funds do, all the Neos funds distribute on a monthly basis. If there's a distribution made where there's a loss generated, that could be potentially deemed a return of capital at the end of the year after the fund accountants and the auditors go through the actual P&L for the funds on that fiscal year. The return of capital, again, if you think about it, you are basically figuring out within the fund how to distribute out what could be a potential loss. And with that, instead of paying, say, a short-term cap gains, you're deferring your taxes down the road and you're lowering your cost basis. So what that could look like is if you sell the fund a year or so later, you might have a potential long-term cap gains on what would have maybe been a short-term cap gain because you deferred those taxes. If you hold on to the fund for a very long time and continue to exhaust your cost basis, eventually those distributions could become capital gains, which would be long-term cap gains instead of, say, ordinary income or a short-term cap gain in that year. So the return of capital structure, we're not trying to return principal, but from an IRS perspective, trying to just defer taxes down the road, obviously with that lower cost basis, and what that could mean for an investor as they're receiving distributions on a monthly and yearly basis.
Troy, that's excellent. Garrett, what if you don't hold the fund for the full year? Is that different?
Yeah, so it can be, right? If you actually only hold the fund for a couple of months, you haven't gotten to a long-term holding period yet. And so, that could definitely change things. Also, your individual holding period for the fund could differ from what us or any ETF issuer is stating more publicly. So a lot of times you'll get these, annual numbers from all the fund administration and accountants that go to your brokerage. That's going to be for your individual position. Publicly, you might see that, a certain product generated 90% return of capital. That's going to basically be on the entire year or the time that the fund had an inception if it was a stub period. So I think it's very important for investors to ensure that their holding period could be slightly different from what they see more publicly because it's really around when they actually bought or sold, an investment.
Let's hone in on the reporting information. It's tax time. People are getting their documents mailed to them. Walk through the 1099 dividend and why that's so important, especially for the tax efficiency of the income.
At the end of the year, everyone's going to receive their 1099s as they might know or might not. Obviously, that's the most important document. That's what's got all of your fund holdings, whether it would be a NEOS fund or another, ETF issuer or a mutual fund. That's going to give you the actual designation of all the underlying profits and losses that each fund had generated throughout the year. On that document, now every custodial platform can be slightly different, but they all have the same general information. You could get short-term capital gains, long-term capital gains, qualified dividend income, return of capital, or a lot of times it's kind of called a non-qualified, distribution. You could see sections where there's a 1256 if you traded index options directly in your account. So there's a lot of different boxes that do show up on that 1099, but each one of your public investments or mutual funds that you're getting from all issuers will state all of that information for your accountant to be able to prepare your taxes for any tax liability that you would owe, during your holding period.
And that's the main document from a tax reporting standpoint. That's the official document. We also hear about, Garrett, 19A1 notices. What are they? And maybe explain their purpose.
A 19A1 notice can be confusing potentially for investors. A 19A1 notice is actually a mandatory disclosure under the Investment Company Act of 1940, requiring an ETF issuer or management company to inform shareholders actually about the potential sources of a dividend payment, particularly ones that are outside or other than net investment income, like return of capital. So what you'll see, and I know Troy will talk about in a minute, when you look at a 19A1 notice, it's going to state, several pieces of information, but one of the most critical things are that on those usually have a sentence or a bolded section that says, do not use this for tax reporting purposes. Why is that? It's a monthly estimate that the fund administrators put together to allow investors to know and understand that net investment income, which is really defined as qualified dividend income or, fixed income coupon payments, does not include return of capital. And so it is going to disclose that the distribution that you're receiving by holding this fund has the potential ability to not be net investment income, and they'll categorize that as a return of capital. That does not mean that at the end of the year, that if you added up all your monthly 19A1 notices, that should be your understanding of what your taxes are. You have to wait till the 1099 comes out because it's not calculating the actual profits and losses of the underlying fund. This is not a document NEOS chooses to put out, nor has anything to do within the preparation of it. It is a regulatory document that we're required to put up onto the website to really disclose that it's not net investment income that is being distributed on a monthly basis, and that you need to wait till the end of the year to see what that composition ultimately ends up being.
Great, Garrett. And Troy, Garrett just said it's on the website. Maybe you can give an example.
Sure. So you think about it, if you go to our website and take a look at those 19A1 notices, and these are on anybody's website that has funds similar to ours that might make a monthly or quarterly distribution. But if you're looking at this document, as it clearly states in the bold part, shareholders should not use this information provided for tax reporting purposes. It's really important to know that this is, as Garrett walked through, a regulatory requirement that the fund admin, fund accounting needs to put out for the funds, showing what the potential of non-net investment income could be, like return of capital. So they put this out for them to, in reality, for them to do the actual P&L and accounting on a monthly basis is just not possible. That's why they do it yearly for the fiscal year. So these are just estimates that go out. And as Garrett stated before, you can't look at this and say, hey, I have 12 19A1 notices for 2025. This is what my return of capital or my long-term, short-term, or et cetera should be for the fund, because that's not how it works. You got to wait for that 1099. That is the most important document. And kind of, again, to go back to the return of capital piece, to generate return of capital, there needs to be losses generated within the fund. And in certain funds, there might be some more losses generated, whether it's through the option roll cycle or so forth. But in some funds, there might not be any return of capital distributed out because there were no losses generated to be able to distribute out a return of capital. So it's important to understand that when you're thinking about these investments and what it can mean. And again, these 19A1 notices are just an estimate and just a piece that needs to go out per regulatory requirements.
Guys, this is great. And obviously, you're very sensitive to shareholder questions. People do have questions, especially this time of year. Garrett, we know that NEOS can't respond directly to individual investors or give personal investment advice. What should an individual investor do if they actually have a question?
An individual investor needs to reach out to their financial advisor, right? A licensed financial professional that understands, their whole personal financial situation. And those can reach out to us and then we can have a conversation. We love talking to investors. We want to make sure that questions are being answered. However, we obviously have requirements, from a regulatory perspective. And so we need financial advisors to be reaching out to us to be able to answer your questions. So if you do have them, please reach out to an advisor or find an advisor that will reach out on obviously your behalf, to get your questions answered. And we would love to speak with them all day, every day to make sure you feel comfortable, confident in what it means, for your obviously investment with us. But unfortunately, we're not allowed to. If you do reach out to us, what that ends up we have to provide that to our broker dealer, and a broker dealer that is not affiliated with NEOS whatsoever has to respond to you with publicly available information. And so that might not be the answer that you're looking to if it's much more specific on your own investment or holdings, within a potential product of ours, or frankly, any other issuer. We all follow the same, requirements. So please, if you have questions, we would love to answer them, but have a financial advisor reach out on your behalf to us, and we'd be more than happy to make sure that they all get answered.
Troy, what about a tax advisor? If you have a licensed accountant, can they reach out on your behalf?
It's always good to talk to your tax professional because they know your individual needs and what else is going on in your life as far as income and so forth. So it's always good to talk to them. One, because you should be passing along your 1099 to them wherever you get it from your brokerage firms. But then two, you should be going through that with them, looking at the investments you have and how does that affect you on a net after tax basis. So it's really important.
Garrett, we try to do these on a regular basis. I know there's a lot of good information on the website, a lot of good education. There are people that will write directly into the website. What can they expect?
Sure. So if someone writes into the website and they're not a financial professional, then we need to be able to provide that to that outside broker dealer that we spoke about. And they would be the ones responding with probably much more of a generic answer because the information they can provide has to be publicly available information for everybody. So if you write into our website or to try to, reach us in some way, shape, or form, please have your financial advisor do that or obtain a financial advisor, because then we would be able to engage in a conversation directly with them to get your specific questions, answered.
In most cases, folks, it can be really simple. Just hand in your 1099 div over to your CPA, and it's got all the information that's needed. But as always, NEOS tries to go above and beyond to make sure that everyone's getting their questions answered and also that there's a good amount of education out there. Guys, I mean, it's not always we're talking about the fun stuff, but this is the important stuff. I mean, as we always talk about, it's not what you make, it's what you keep. And these are the necessary items to make sure we do that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, these are the important things. At the end of the day, it's what the investor keeps afterwards, and what they're choosing to put their hard-earned money into. And so we obviously very much appreciate that opportunity to be stewards of individual and investors' capital. And so from that standpoint, these are the important conversations to try to get correct information and content out there.
Troy, Garrett, thanks, guys, and looking forward to seeing you next month.